So there's flow like water for protection, and there's float like a butterfly. What would the equivalent be in aggression?
Hone technique.
Welcome back to Winning Hand, the podcast about Marvel Champions, one card at a time. This is episode 19 and all about one of our favorite aggression cards. And we are going to get into that later. If you click the episode title, you already know what it is. It's Hone Technique, obviously. Thanks for being here. Thanks for joining us. I am your host, Boom Guy. I'm joined today by Keiko.
Hello.
And LazyTitan.
Greetings.
Welcome back, boys. It's good to have the three of us together to podcast, to talk about our favorite game.
My absolute favorite game. This is
Everybody's
the only
favorite
game I
game.
play.
Before we get into the episode today, we are going to talk about what we have been playing recently. LazyTitan, do you want to kick us off? What have you been playing recently?
Recently, I went back to a hero that is sneakily one of my favorites, and I think maybe a little out of character for me, which is Colossus. I've played him a lot, and I've played him in a couple different aspects, which is also out of character for me. But every time I play him, I just really have a really good time with him. His tough card mechanic is really well done, and it's really fun. It feels really rewarding to always be able to not defend for the villain, just always take the hit and lose the tough card and then draw another card. And I think some of the more recent cards have made him even more powerful. So with stuff like superpower adaptation or superpower training that lets you get your Iron Will, and build support lets you get some resources that you're looking for, your X-Jet or whatever. And then Hope Summers also lets you get Iron Will. He's just got a lot more ways to get Iron Will, which is really key for him. I played him in Protection most recently, which is probably the best. It's the easiest to get tough cards. You can just always have one with really not much effort, rather than like in Justice, the way I play him is you have to flip down a lot to get the free one you get. Or
because you get one when you flip up, right?
You get one when you flip up.
From
So
Alter Ego.
Justice, I play him in Justice pretty often, and you can use... I just try and cycle his armor up, which is his card that lets him flip. Plus, you get the hand size benefit, and Justice has a lot of ways to prevent scheme while in Alter Ego. So that's what I do it. But this time it was Protection, and I didn't flip down as much because you are like almost indestructible. And with a lot of those Protection allies like Armor and Polaris, you are able to defend for a lot of other people also, and you just always have this little bunker of allies and tough cards and allies with tough cards that you can just kind of sit in and never take damage, which is really fun.
Yeah.
You mentioned that you mostly play Colossus in Justice. I don't think I'd ever hear you say that. Is that just because the synergy of that aspect kind of works better with Colossus?
I think I really just wanted to flip down every turn was the idea of the deck that I most often play. Is I wanted to flip down every single turn to get his free tough card. That way, because you're not in Protection, so that's the easiest way to get him. So if you flip down every turn, you get a 6 hand size, then you can flip up, and then you draw another card. So then I was like, well, how do I stop from losing on threat? And then Justice was the easy one there, and you can use Foiled and stuff like that to prevent that. It's out of character for me, but I do enjoy Colossus Justice quite a bit.
And you can use Foiled, and Great Responsibility is another good one for that deck.
Great Responsibility is great for Colossus because you can block as much threat as you want to and take no damage probably because you have a tough card. And then draw another card because of Iron Will. So it's a free thwart prevention.
Like Keiko said, I don't think I've heard you mention any other hero in the episodes we've done where you like to play them in Justice.
I mean, we've even
It's not
mentioned
common.
before that Justice for Titan and me was like our least favorite
it's
aspect.
Definitely my least favorite aspect. Still
I think
is.
it's my least favorite too.
But Colossus, for some reason, which is why I think he's sneakily one of my favorites, because I do like him in a lot of aspects. I think he's really fun most of the time.
I've not seen you play him in Leadership, I don't think, but I've seen you play the other ones.
I play Leadership even less than I play Justice. I think Leadership is really boring and not very fun, so I just don't do it.
And
Well,
Domino's the exception.
Your Protection Colossus deck has saved me many times because I like to take punches to the face, and then most I can never really handle. But I think Colossus maybe is a hero that I'll try in the future because the way he stacks tough cards and the way he does just take punches to the face, which I love to do.
It's great if you want to take damage.
But you also might like, I mean, if you put him in leadership, you could use cards like Moxie. If you're going to be flipping every turn, you're going to boost his stats. Limitless Stamina lets him ready, so you can boost your stats that way. I don't know.
Yeah.
Just an idea.
I'll
do it.
consider it.
I've never played Colossus before, so maybe I'll be the one to try out a Colossus leadership. Who knows? Maybe
You got to try it out. I'll go next. I've been playing a bunch of Mysterio. So we're just kind of coming out of spooky season. But I play Mysterio quite a bit. He is, I think, my favorite villain from the Sinister Motives box. I think Mysterio is really, really fun. I think he's sneaky, like maybe one of my favorite scenarios, period. I really like how clever his mechanic is. He's hard. He's like difficult and tricky in a way that I think many other villains aren't. A lot of the really hard villains just rely on basically hitting you very hard, like Ronin or Thanos, or just adding a ton of scheme. Yeah, Juggernaut, another one. Like Venom Goblin, just scheming all the time, hitting you really hard. And they just rely kind of on that brute force of just like, I'm just going to bludgeon you with so much damage or so much threat that you have to, like, you just are going to die. And Mysterio, I think, is different. He has the illusions and the way he's shuffling things into your deck, and the way he has these minions that aren't very difficult. Like, they're very, except for the doppelgangers are okay, but his little shadows or whatever they're called.
Mm-hmm. Shifting apparitions.
Shifting apparitions, thank you. They're not tricky. Like, they only have 1/1. They only have 1 hit point. But if you hit them with excess damage, they go into your discard pile, and he starts shuffling things in your discard pile. He's got a bunch of cards that make you discard your hand and draw back up, ideally to make you draw those cards, probably. So I often find him tricky and enjoyable without just relying on what can kind of sometimes feel like cheap tricks, right? Like Hood just surges you. It's just like, here's a bunch of surge, see how many encounter cards you can handle, LOL. And like, I think that's a cheap way to make something more difficult. Same thing for, I think Juggernaut's fun and Ronin can be fun, but it's just like, can you survive 8 damage attack and another one this turn and another one? Like, if you can just do that. But yeah, Mysterio, sneaky, one of my favorite encounters, I think, in the whole game. It's probably top 5 for me at this point.
I would agree. I like Mysterio quite a lot.
And he's got kind of a spooky theme, so we played him a lot in October.
He's got some theme. His thing is making you discard your cards a lot. He makes you like lose your hand or discard cards and draw cards. So you always have a full hand size usually with Mysterio. He's not like making you discard all your cards and have no cards. He's like making you like redraw a hand, which is always really weird.
He likes to put cards into your deck and then cycle your deck
and
so that you
draw them.
Yeah. Yep.
And if you're already drawing a lot of cards, you're playing a hero who does that, you're going to get punished by having 4, 5, 6 encounter cards every turn. And they're not that bad, but they're enough that it like starts to become a lot and kind of annoying.
Yeah.
And even on top of that, there's enough of those encounter cards that they themselves have surge. So
a couple of them have surge too, so you're getting 10 encounter cards around sometimes.
It is a lot of fun. Even if I am losing against him, it's still fun to lose against him just because of that gimmick.
Yeah, it's creative, and I like that a lot. So it feels different from a lot of other scenarios. So I definitely appreciate that. Keiko?
So, some episodes ago, we did an episode on Ms. Marvel. I made a promise that I would try her out, and I did. Very much enjoyed her this second time around compared to playing her pre-con.
Okay.
I will give a shout out. I did build this deck from Marvel CDB. It's called Dig Through the Ditches. And this is created by Shemendrix. And it's aggression. So I was like, all right, that's the deck for me. We kind of talked about how her base stat kind of makes her open to build in any aspect. And we mentioned before that, aggression, that's my go-to. Hone technique is this episode, so I figure how fitting. But the way that this deck is built is it revolves around her ability to discard your deck. Something very similar to Domino, which actually this deck includes some of the cards that came with Domino, like Digging Deep. It's a resource card that if it gets discarded, you add it to your hand. It also builds on taking out minions, so a lot of her attack events. And it's 40 cards, something that I thought that I would never say that I'd have. So it is a 40-card deck. And no, it worked really well. I would like to see how it fares in multiplayer. I've only played it in solo, and I've struggled a little bit with Rhino, but with Crossbones, I fared a little better. But no, I think there's just more to build off from her.
Is Honed Technique in that deck?
It is not. Maybe I should have put it in there for a 41 card deck.
Yeah, that's surprising. She's so event based, and if you're playing her in aggression, and she can always hit the resource kicker because she's got that. Her suit gives her a wild resource. So it seems like a pretty natural fit, but I don't know what the deck was doing.
Yeah, unless this deck is playing cheap events. If this deck isn't playing big ones, if you're playing mostly ones and zeros or even twos, it may not be worth it.
Yeah, that's true. That's good. So, Ms. Marvel, that's your second aspect you've played her in now? Protection and aggression, right?
Yes. Yep. Second aspect. Second time ever playing her. No, I can see the potential based on what we talked about and based on this second game. So, no, I think I'd be excited to play her in other aspects, other decks, and try this one out some more.
Nice. So you think you'll be returning to Ms. Marvel?
I think so. I can see why she was a popular vote for that episode.
We have an audience question today that I think is kind of interesting, and I'm curious to hear what you guys think and what you say about it. The question was from, his name is Solo Papa. I remembered this time. That's your shout out.
Good job.
This question is, what is your process for deck building, and do you play precons first? LazyTitan, I'm going to give you the first word here. What's your process for building a deck, and do you play precons?
Well, as the resident deck expert in the in the crew,
maybe I should have let you go last because what you say is going to be definitive, and I'll have nothing more to add.
But
yeah,
no, I think. Well, short answer for precons: no, I don't. I don't ever play the precons. I just take it apart and build a new deck because I find that they're not often very good, and I also don't like playing a deck that I didn't build. It makes it harder to. It's more confusing. I can't really figure out what I'm supposed to be doing. I just think it's kind of not as fun. So I just build myself. My go-to method is just grab cards. The general strategy is just grab every card you think might be worth it. That's your first draft, and then you go over it and you cut cards that you're looking through that you think might not work. So if I'm building an aggression deck, I'll grab Hone Technique almost always as a starter, and then you look back through your deck on the second time. You say, wow, most of my events are pretty cheap. These are all ones, zeros, maybe twos. I don't actually need Hone Technique. Or, wow, this is a really expensive deck, but I didn't put Hone Technique in here. I should grab that. And you kind of cut it down from there. Or sometimes you can look at things like, I have Battle Fury in this list, but not really playing not like getting a lot of minions, and I have a consistent way to find them, so probably don't need that, or whatever your metric is, and you just cut it down from there. And you should always try and cut down to 40 because it is objectively better. But sometimes there's some cards you want to play, and sometimes it can be really hard to cut a deck. I remember when, for the first Con of Heroes, when Hone Technique had just come out, it came out like that day.
Yeah.
And after the first day of the con, I went home and I stayed up basically all night building the rocket deck that I've talked about before, the rocket minions that I believe is like the quintessential rocket deck. That is, you're getting all those minions and you're playing dive bomb. And it took me, I cut it down to 40 because I knew I wanted it to be really good. So I wanted it to be the lowest cost you could have. But it took me hours of just looking through the stack and again and again and again, which you don't have to do that much work. I just really wanted that deck to be perfect.
And you're not one who plays solo. I mean, I think a lot of people test their decks playing solo, so you could have tested it, but you didn't. You just kind of read through the cards and imagine it, or what?
I would like to think I'm pretty good at card games, so when I play a game, I mostly can, once I've played a game enough, like Marvel Champions, I played a lot of games of Marvel Champions, I can sort of just conceptualize how things are going to fit together and work. So I just look at the cards, think about how, whenever I play this card, how it feels, what I'm looking to do, how these heroes work, how their curves are, and sort of how you can build it out. And then I kind of do it from there. I think it would probably benefit my process to play solo, but I don't really have any interest. So
for me, I think it's interesting how you said how you start your deck building. For me, it starts with one of two things. I either get the itch to play a hero, either they're new, or I just haven't played one in a while, or I'm just, for whatever reason, I'm vibing on a hero. And then I'll pull that hero out and think about what makes them unique and what they do, and then try to build around that. The other way it often starts for me is with a single card. So I will find a single card or think of a card or one will come out that I think this is really cool. And sometimes it's just one card I build around, or it's an interaction I think about. I think I mentioned before, I built a weird Hawkeye deck with Auto Octavius. And my idea was, how can I ready Hawkeye's bow to get more attacks or play more arrow events? And the way I came up with when I built that deck was I just thought, well, Auto comes in and he readies a bow or attack upgrade, right? From there, I just kind of built out this whole deck. And then, of course, you have to go through the process of you have to have a Web Warrior card to play Auto, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a weird interaction like that. Or I'll think about, I tried to build a Vision Air Supremacy deck once where Vision has access to Aerial and Air Supremacy is not an attack. It's just a skill event. So he can play that in Intangible. So I thought, okay. Then I tried to build it out with Aerial allies and just to make that interaction work. And those not often the best deck. I think we've talked about deck building before, LazyTitan, and you've mentioned there's like different kinds of decks, right? There's combo decks and there's whatever. Why don't you tell us about deck types?
Basically, in almost every card game, I don't think Marvel Champions is really an exception. There are really 3 kinds of decks, and that is combo, control, and aggro. Basically, a combo deck wants to get a certain number of cards. Generally, the fewer cards are in your combo, the better. That means it's more consistent and more powerful. But you want to build a combo like Hone Technique and Dive Bomb, and you want to put those 2 cards together. Maybe that's not the best example, but something like that, and you just go. And then those 2 cards work together, and you should get your win from that. Like an aggro deck, an aggressive deck, is something like a rush deck, basically. Like a Drax aggression deck, or even Drax protection sometimes, where you're just trying to kill the villain as fast as you possibly can.
And ignoring everything else.
There's no thwarting. You're not keeping yourself alive. You're just trying to kill the villain faster than they can kill you. That, I think, struggles often in higher player counts because you can't do that. If you're playing, especially with some villains, you're playing Thanos, you can't do 200 damage before Thanos can hit you for 12 or whatever your hit points are.
Right, because their hit points scale with player count, but your damage does not scale.
Mm-hmm. Right. So you just can't keep up with the villain sometimes. And then a control deck is something that wants to, it's sort of like the opposite. So you want to keep the board state going for as long as possible because you're going to win in a long game. So heroes who can draw a lot of cards and get a lot of value, like Ironheart, are generally good at that because it means you will inevitably win the game, which is how most people, I think, play Marvel Champions. You will inevitably win the game if you just keep thwarting and killing minions and defending for yourself, and you will eventually win. And that's the basic strategy. Most people play sort of a control archetype, which I think works for this game. It's probably how it's intended to be played.
A lot of upgrades, a lot of
supports, a lot of thwarting. That's the way most decks are built, and that's the way the game is designed, which means you can't switch it up too much. There are variations within that. Sometimes some decks go faster, some heroes go faster. And part of that is that the hero decks themselves, the 15 cards, can indicate what you should be doing or limit you to what you can do.
Yeah.
Basically, when you build a deck, you should be thinking about what you want this deck to be doing. That would be my number one tip for anyone trying to build a deck, is just think about what you want that deck to be doing and how you want to get there.
Yeah.
So if you want to kill the villain, what's your damage? How are you going to do that?
I think that's a really important thing to remember when you're building decks. And if there's new people listening or people who aren't as familiar with deck construction games like this, it is important to keep in mind what you want your deck to do. A lot of decks on Marvel CDB have extensive write-ups, and some of them include pictures and GIFs, and there's a lot. But the valuable part is that they will walk you through how that deck came to be, right? Looking up a deck list on Marvel CDB is one thing, but if you read what they put below, the narrative, you should be able to see why those cards are included. Why is there only 2 copies of this event instead of 3? Why is this card in there instead of this card? Many of them are tested and played multiple times, and there's a justification, right? They've weaned it down. They've gone through what the deck should do. And if you read that narrative, you'll understand what you should be doing with these cards, what you should be prioritizing in a mulligan, what are things you really should play, what are things you should toss. And it's almost like writing an outline for a book, right? When you want to write a book, if anyone's ever written a book, you don't just open up your word processor and start typing. You have a lot of research. You have a lot of outlines you write. Do you have some idea of where it's all going and how to structure it?
Maybe my answer might be a little more relatable for those new coming or those who aren't very familiar.
Yeah.
I like to start every hero with their precon because to me, because I'm not very strong in deck building, and I feel that playing them at least once, so that way I can get a sort of a feel for what that hero is meant to do, what their deck is meant to do, and then from there I'll build, or I'll either build from scratch or build off of that precon. There's only a few heroes that I have sort of an immediate idea of how I want to build them. Domino being one of them, because some heroes kind of have that more straightforward ability or gimmick. Her thing is that she discards a bunch of her deck, and a lot of her identity cards already play off of that. So that's more of something that I want to play into more. She's got a base defense stat of 3, so for me, I want to build off that gimmick and protection maybe. So I'm working on that deck to play at some later point. The other hero I would say kind of popped out to me was Spider Woman. I've mentioned it before. She's kind of my signature hero. I put her in aggression and leadership because she's an Avenger. There's a ton of Avenger cards that play off each other.
Mm-hmm.
Leadership, I remember seeing as I'm kind of going through my cards, Triskelion, which gives you an increase to your ally limit. There's Avengers Tower that gives you an increase if you have all Avengers, and then I saw Stinger, who bypasses that. So to me, that was kind of like, oh, I want a deck that has a million allies and they're all Avengers. So hers kind of came together that way as well. But I'd say the biggest thing for deck building for me is just a ton of trial and error, a ton of it. I'm not very strong at it. There are just heroes that I'm drawn to because I like them as a character, or maybe because I like them as a gimmick. And I try and just build something, fail at it 100 times, get some help from you guys, for example, and I just keep going until I get to something that's a little more solid.
I think you're 100% right. I think as much as we can give advice, I think ultimately trial and error is the most important part. And that's really how I also learned how to deck build. The difference between Keiko and I is that I have been playing games similar to Marvel Champions and card games for 10 years or something. So I did all my trial and error years ago, and I've sort of figured out my process. But it's ultimately the only way to figure it out is just to build more decks. And I think, like Boomer was saying, reading those write-ups is actually super helpful because you can see how other people think about the decks they build, how they're processing, what they're considering, why they put cards in, how they decide which cards to go in. It can be helpful to understand how other people do that. So I think that's worth going on Marvel CDB to look for inspiration, just pick a hero and an aspect, look for people who built a similar deck, and then read what they had to say on why they built it or why they do it and how the mulligan works. And that then you just have to consider that kind of thing when you build your own decks, and you'll be golden.
Usually by the time Heroes release, there's already a million decks on Marvel CDB of people who have been testing and building and writing these things up based on the cards that were teased or spoiled before they even came out. So on day one, there's usually a ton of decks for whatever hero. So if you're new, marvelcdb.com is a huge, invaluable resource, honestly, to the community. You can look up cards there if you just want to know what a card does. If you're not sure what pack it came from, it's listed there. And then there's plenty of decks. So highly recommended. Check that out if you're new to the game. Now let's transition to the card of the day. The card of the day is, at this point, maybe, would we call it an aggression staple? We might.
I don't
Not
know
for
if
every
I
deck.
would.
Not every deck.
Which I think
But
means
see
it's
it
not a
fairly
staple.
commonly. Yeah.
But I think if
right.
it's not almost included in every deck, it's not really a staple.
Okay, fair enough. LazyTitan, do you want to read the card for us before we start talking about it?
Yes, I can. So Hone Technique is a 3-cost aggression upgrade, which has a requirement of 2 mental resources, which means you have to spend at least 2 mental resources to play this card. It is max 1 per player and is an interrupt. After you play an aggression attack event, if you paid for that event using a mental resource, increase the amount of damage that event deals by its printed cost. And it also gives you a mental resource if you spend it.
Yeah,
Which
so
is important.
that is important. Crucially, before we talk about breaking down the card like we normally do, let's talk about the interrupt. It specifically says when you play an aggression attack event. That means this has to be a red aspect card.
Mm-hmm.
You're not playing Shield Toss with this. You're not playing Ghost Kick with this. You're not playing Haymaker with this, right? It has to be a red aggression aspect card.
Mm-hmm.
It also has to be traded as an attack.
Yep.
So you're not playing Bombs Away, which is the new aerial skill event card that came with Angel, because it's not traded as an attack. So it has to meet those crucial 2 criteria. It has to be a red attack card. It also has to be paid for with a mental resource. So I just want to clarify this because I think sometimes this card can be confusing, especially for newer players. That means the card Dropkick, which many people use in a lot of aggression decks. It's a 3-cost event that deals 4 damage, and I think if you pay with all
Only
fist
fist.
resources, you stun that enemy.
And draw a card.
And draw a card. Well, you're not going to hit that kicker. You can play Dropkick. 3 cost, 4 damage. You can add the damage because it is an aggression attack event. You'll do 3 for 7, but you will not hit that kicker of stunning and drawing a card because you can't only pay for it with fist resources. So I think that's important to just kind of talk about at the start so we clarify what this card does and what this card doesn't do.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We usually start with the art of the card. So I will tell you, this came in the Nova pack, the Nova Hero pack. And the art is from Marvel's Iron Man 2 adaptation, Volume 1, Number 2 from 2013. The art it looks like Black Widow. She's, I think, sliding down a hallway, and it looks like she has in quick succession punched a hallway full of goons, and she's maybe sliding or jumping through the frame. Does that kind of sum up what's happening?
It looks like she slid on her knees and took all these dudes out mid-slide is what I'm getting here.
Looks like she just threw something.
She threw a Roomba toward us.
Yeah, I don't know what that is. It looks like a hubcap or a manhole cover or a Roomba.
Maybe
or
it's
something.
like a batarang, but it's spinning,
yeah, but it's
so
a
it
disc?
looks like a circle.
Oh,
maybe it's a
okay.
frisbee. Maybe she's frolfing.
She
All
could
you
be frolfing.
frolf lovers out there.
I don't know. She's doing
It's
something.
unclear.
She hit some dudes with something, threw some things at some guys.
Yeah, you can see there's punch effects that you can see throughout the frame. It looks like she's punch and then move forward, punched, move forward and punched again. So you can kind of see the punches. It looks like it's happened very fast. They're in various states of bending over after being hit in the crotch and falling down after being hit in the face. It's unclear.
It's kind of funny because I was going to say that this art specifically reminds me of the MCU's Iron Man 2, where she's fighting a hallway of guys. So it's funny that you pointed out this is from the adaptation comic. So
I didn't realize
it reminds me of that as well. With
but
the
it
red
makes sense.
hair, the suit is what she's wearing, I think. So it does remind me of that.
So for anybody
didn't
who's
think of
watched
that.
it, then that's pretty much what the art kind of envisions.
Yeah, it does evoke that scene. I didn't think of that until I read that that's where the art was from, and then it immediately came to me. I will say I don't love this art.
I don't know if
think
it
it's-
matches Hone technique, at least like you said, how the art is portrayed. It's just kind of quick succession hits, but is it really something that you would call a honed technique?
Yeah,
I think it's fine. I like it. It's cool. I don't know if it's 100% hone technique, but I think it's enough. I mean, I feel like Black Widow's pretty good for hone technique, right? Because she doesn't have any power, so she's fighting villains with just training, that kind of thing. Maybe that's what they're trying to go for.
It's a little bland to me. The dudes in the suits are very deep black. So there's no detail. It's just black. And her suit is very black. It has a little more detail, but it's very dark. The whole thing seems a little underexposed, maybe. Just
Maybe
a
that's
little
what it is.
darker than I want it to be.
There's too many silhouettes in the overall art instead
I wish
of
it was a little brighter with some more detail. I don't know. It's okay. I don't love it, but I don't hate it either. I guess I'm kind of in the middle on this. I do wish it was a little better because the card that sticks around, right? It sits on your table, so
and
you
it's
can see it all
played
game.
often.
It is one you see a lot. What about theme then? We kind of mentioned it a little bit already, but does this feel like hone technique? And let me ask this then. Before we then, does it feel like hone technique? I'll ask a little more specific question. The mental resource thing. How do we feel about the mental resource thing? Is that, aside from the power or what it does mechanically, theme-wise, why is there a mental resource? Do we feel like that's justified?
I guess that maybe goes into more of what Titan was saying. It doesn't have to do with the powers or the brute force. It's about how you can kind of play out a scene, whether it's on the board or, in this art, and just how do you kind of execute that?
Mm-hmm. I think first of all, it's good game design. Because the resource thing is a thing that's sort of unique to Marvel Champions, and using that in this way is fun gameplay wise and deck building wise. But I think theme wise, I think it makes sense, right? The like aggression is sort of the raw punch deal damage aspect, but I think this card lets you get into more of that sort of like almost martial arts thing of like it's not just about punching really hard, it's about outthinking and outsmarting and planning your attacks and hitting the right and like pressure points and that kind of thing of like not just hitting harder but hitting better. So I think that sort of evokes that idea.
Yeah, I like the mental aspect of like, you had to think it through, you're planning it. It's a little more mental than physical, like dropkick is just fists resource, you're just punching. I think, like you said, the resource thing is a little unique to Marvel Champions, and I think it's a little undercooked, to be quite honest. It often doesn't matter at all. And when it does, I don't know, it doesn't always feel like we take full advantage of it, thematically or mechanically.
Yeah, and I think this is one of the first cards that really took advantage of it.
Well, I mean, Iron Man was in the core set. He had a thing for lightning resources, and so did Captain Marvel. So right out the gate, they were like, resources matter.
It wasn't so much of a build around as I think this card became. Like Iron Man, I feel like you're not putting in all lightning resources. I have done it before, but I feel like that's not a common way to build Iron Man. And I think Captain Marvel,
Hulk came out a little bit after that. He was all about fists. So I think it did matter before
it exists,
this.
But I think maybe this is the first out of hero card. This is the first aspect card that really cared about.
I'll agree with that.
A specific resource.
Keiko, what were you going to say?
I was just going to say it's very poetic, I think, for this card to be aggression. It just overall is kind of that brains over brawn mentality. So it kind of works. You're building aggression. Chances are you're just looking to punch really hard. But then here's this card. It kind of tells you to slow down, think about it for a second, thematically speaking.
And it's traded as a skill, which still, I think, very little, if anything, cares about in this game. I'd like to see that developed a little bit. And
Psylocke cares. She can search out skills.
That's true.
Which I actually
haven't played. Is it any skills or just skill events?
She lets you search out skills. Her one card that does it. It's alter ego. I think you exhaust it, search for a skill. No, it's exhaust, search for skills, and action. If you're an alter ego, you don't have to discard a card. But she searches for skills and also uses a lot of mental resources. So she's probably a very good hone technique deck. I just haven't tried her yet.
That sounds interesting.
Yeah,
I'm willing to try that.
Her training regimen support. It's a 1-cost support. You exhaust it and search deck for a skill card and add it to your hand. So crucially, it's not an event card. It can be anything. So she could search out hone technique. And then if you're in hero form, you discard a card from your hand. So you basically just swap it for a different card. But if you're an alter ego, you just draw it.
But she has 2 mental resource generators, which means you can always play hone technique. So if you just exhaust those 2 things, generate 2 mental resources, and then you can always play hone technique, even with that requirement, which is true. I haven't tried that, but I need to now.
Aside from Psylocke, is there anything that really plays off the skill trait? Because there are cards that play off the superpower trait, the attack trait, of course, but I don't recall seeing anything. Tactics?
No, I think she's it. I think there's been maybe a couple cards. But we've been asking for something to care about skills for a long time. At least me and Boom Guy have been talking about it.
I think that would be a cool thing. There was nothing that cared about tactics until Cyclops came along,
and he still doesn't even really.
He cares a little bit. They're only about upgrades. I mean, he has some cards that search out any tactic, but it's very limited. I would like them to explore that space a little bit more. I think skills and tactics are really cool things you could build heroes around, or you could build archetypes around, right? Navigating like more skillful heroes. That's kind of cool. Or tactics is the more like planning type. That's something I'd like to see more of.
Same. I think that's cool.
So let's talk about power then. So the power of this card, where do we feel like this falls? I know you have a lot to say about this LazyTitan. I'm gonna let Keiko have the first word. How do you feel about honed technique in terms of power, not fun?
I've never used this card before until you guys brought it up, and this was still when I was kind of in the upbringing of Marvel Champions, but I've still yet to utilize it. So I'm ready to see how this will go. But one thing I thought that at a glance, I thought that this was a very overpowered card until you pointed out that it has to be played on an aggression-specific attack event. So there's two things right there. And then, of course, has to be paid with at least one mental resource. Because I remember thinking, like, it doesn't have to exhaust it all. Like, that's not too much. But after you pointed out those three things, I was like, okay, I can see the balance in it.
And then you really start to look through the aggression cards. There's a bunch of them that aren't actually attack events, right? Even the events. I can think off the top of my head, Mean Swing and Skilled Strike, for example. Those are 0 anyway and wouldn't really work for this card. But Mean Swing and Skilled Strike are not attack events. They're just skills that are events.
And that kind of begs the question again is, again, as somebody who hasn't played this yet, what is the biggest use of this? Because you play it, and what does it really kind of play off of from there?
Well, Dive Bomb is the answer. It's Dive Bomb.
Got it.
Which was a card for those Marvel Champions veterans, for you old heads in the crowd. Dive Bomb was like a useless card for months.
Came in the core set. And it was, at least in my opinion, like basically unplayable until Nova came out, because it was just kind of this weird event that I wouldn't say unplayable. I think in the core set it worked. I think it specifically was created with Ultron in mind, right? Just like beat 'em up.
And it beats Ultron pretty hard, but it was just sort of this weird event that was 4 for 7, which already doesn't feel very good. And then it just 1 to everyone, which is like, you sort of get like that Squirrel Girl kind of tough card breaking thing. But it's on your big attack, so you kind of want to generally you want to break your tough cards before you do your big attack, so it doesn't really work out. It's just sort of a weird thing. But when this card came out, when Hone Technique came out, we all looked at this card and we're like, that seems really good. And then I don't remember who it was, but somebody said, hey, this increases all damage, so this makes Dive Bomb 4 for 11 and 5 to all enemies. And then I was inspired, and we all were like, wait, hold on, this card might be insane. And then we built what we have now. So short answer, it's Dive Bomb, because it just means that Dive Bomb becomes spend your hand, deal 11 damage to the villain, kill every minion, pass the turn. And you can just do that every turn.
Yeah.
You draw a Dive Bomb.
So two things I'll say about that. First of all, I think Hone Technique is a demarcation in the game's life. There's before Hone Technique and there's after Hone Technique. It has changed the way the game is played. The aerial Dive Bomb specific combo became, for a while, omnipresent. It was everywhere. Every deck had aerial Dive Bomb. If you're playing aggression with an aerial character, you're using Hone Technique and Dive Bomb. It got a little tiresome for me. Like, I just saw every deck using Dive Bomb. But what it does, I think, Hone Technique, is it means any future card that's developed, aggression, attack event, has to take into account the cost, right? Before Hone Technique, you could create an event that was very powerful and make it high cost, which means it's more difficult to play it. You're less likely to play it. It takes your whole hand, right? For example, Dive Bomb. It takes your whole hand. It's a standard 5 hand size hero. Your whole hand to play Dive Bomb. So that's a way you can limit it from just getting spammed over and over again. But now that's no longer something you can do to like kind of gatekeep those more powerful events. In fact, it just makes it better now with Hone Technique, right? Because you can create a 4-cost event and say, okay, it'll do 30 damage, but it costs 5, so it'll be very difficult to play. Someone will figure out how to play it, and now you just made that card even better because Dive Bomb exists. So whatever you think about it, I think it's very powerful, and it just makes everything better, basically. And we talked about it with Miss Marvel specifically, because Miss Marvel, right, she can split, or no, she can't split, but she can increase. So we talked about how different cards can split damage, make her really good because she can increase each instance of that split damage. Just like you said with Dive Bomb, LazyTitan, same thing here. Hone Technique increases all of that. So Miss Marvel, with an aggression attack event, can, for example, melee, right, which is 3 cost for 3 damage and 3 damage. Miss Marvel makes that 3 cost, and she can increase it to make it 5 damage and 5 damage. Hone Technique can make it 3 for 8 damage and 8 damage, right? Just keeps increasing it.
Just keeps scaling that damage. And also, I think to your point of watching the cost of cards, now any aggression card that does damage to multiple sources also has to be evaluated. Because for those who don't know, generally the best value you can get out of this card is by splitting damage. So like Dive Bomb is the best card, not only because it's 4 for 11, which is great, but it also, because it does that 1 damage to everyone else, it becomes 5 damage to everything else. So that means you can just decimate almost every minion ever printed with just playing a Dive Bomb, and you can accidentally kill all the minions.
Yeah.
So now any aggression card that does damage to multiple enemies or splits damage somehow has to be double checked. Then it can't cost too much because it could be Hone Technique, but it also can't cost too little because that's a powerful effect. So
yeah.
I
said when this card came out, I said that this might break the game.
Yep, and you still might be right.
I don't know if I'm right. When it first came out and I saw it that first weekend at the con, I thought, this breaks the game. I think it gave aggression a needed boost. Aggression was lagging a little bit early in the game. I don't know if it's broken the game. I think the game is still fine. But it does change fundamentally how the meta of aggression is played.
You have to design cards differently because this card exists.
Yep.
Would you guys argue that since this card released, aggression attack events on average have gotten a little weaker because they have to take into account now the cost of the card, the power of the card, based on this Hone Technique card?
What events have come out since this card?
That's a good question. I mean, a lot of events have come out. I guess I don't know them
Precision
enough.
Strike came out, which doesn't really benefit that much from this.
Precision Strike, 1x1.
Bombs Away.
Bombs Away is not an attack.
I know, but I'm saying that's an aggression event.
So there, I think you're seeing it, right? You create Precision Strike and 1x1, which are perfect examples of splitting damage, but they're very cheap. So Hone Technique only adds 1. It doesn't do a ton.
Which isn't really worth it.
Same thing with Bombs Away. It's an incredibly powerful event, and if it was an attack event, it was attack traded, it would be basically Dive Bomb, but a little bit cheaper. But it's not an attack event. So in those cards, just off the top of my head, I can already see how this card has impacted the design, right? Because just removing the attack trait means, okay, you can actually use this with Dive Bomb.
Mm-hmm.
Or you can't use this with Hone Technique, excuse me. And same thing with 1x1 and Precision Strike, which could be very powerful, right? If they were like cost a little higher, then you could just make it crazy. So I think it's impacted design. I don't know if I can know the card pool in and out well enough to say exactly like, here's how it's gone over time. I don't have any data to back that up. But it's definitely impacting the way the game is played, and I can only imagine the way the game is designed.
Yeah. I don't know if it's making aggression events worse, because I think Bombs Away, Prison Strike 1x1 are still all good events, but I think it's just like Boomguy was saying, it's changing it. Like those are different events. We're not just getting Uppercut anymore, which Uppercut, another card benefited by Hone Technique, because before it was 3 for 5, now it's just Swinging Web Kick. If you play with Hone Technique, anyone can have Swinging Web Kick as long as you play red.
Which is crazy.
Yeah, that's the kind of thing that this card lets you do. And I think another thing that Hone Technique, one of the things I like about it is it makes you play, or it makes you want to play those big events. We often talk about how playing big events and those expensive cards is sometimes like hard to rationalize. It's hard to be like, I really want to play like Dive Bomb. It was just too expensive for not enough value, or Uppercut, or things like that. It's like, it doesn't really feel great. But now with Hone Technique, you can just look at it and be like, 3 for 8, that's Swinging Web Kick. 4 for 7 or 11 and 5, that's crazy. And it lets you really go back to those big events and really want to play them, and not just lean into playing all the cheapest events like Pitchback and No Quarter and all that stuff. Although No Quarter probably would go in this deck. But it makes you think about building decks differently. It makes you think about making the game differently. It makes you think about playing the game differently. It fundamentally changed the way Marvel Champions was, I think, is ultimately the crux of it.
I agree. I don't think... I wish there was some variant of this for other aspects, because I think there are some things that could be done to benefit, to help with those higher costed things, like this did with those high cost events, right? Like you could do things for allies, for example, and make allies like Heimdall and what's the other Asgard, the 5 cost
Beta Ray
one?
Bill.
Beta Ray Bill. You could make them playable if it's like, if you play an ally above a certain cost, above cost 4, whatever, draw a card for each point above that. Something like that, just to lean into what they're doing to make those playable, because Beta Ray Bill is nice and everything, but like I'm not paying for Beta Ray Bill. So
Yeah.
And I think you do the same thing with some of the other things too, right?
Yeah, I think
the
encouraging
aspects.
people to play expensive cards is good. I think that's a
Yeah,
good way
it
to
is.
do it. And
Because
but I think
the
you have to
meta
be careful.
became like you just play cheap cards, right? And I
Yeah,
think
that's how
when Gamora came out, for
games usually
example,
work,
people
yeah.
really just leaned into, okay, well, I'll just play all the 0 cost, all the 1 cost things and just do little damage. And I think this then said, okay, here's a reason to play 3 and 4 cost events. And that's good.
That's good. I think that's very good. I think that is important for the health of the game.
Yeah, to use the whole card pool.
Mm.
Okay, then fun-wise, how do we feel about the fun of this card?
I love this card.
I know you do. You're the aggression guy here.
I'm the aggression guy, and this card honestly probably made me the aggression guy.
Yeah.
I liked aggression, but when Nova came out and I looked at this card, it was a whole new world. Inspiration struck, and it's a whole different game now. Just the way that you can completely change the game with one card, and it even benefits your like cheaper events like No Quarter, which is an insane event that ups that damage. Anything that costs 2 or more really just gets such a boost off this card. It's so worth it. And it's also a really fun deck building challenge of who has aerial. Well, who has aerial for dive bomb? You don't have to do that, but that's usually how one does it. Who can make mental resources? Who can find this card? And then you can build interesting decks. So like Psylocke, not aerial, but makes mental resources and can find this card guaranteed. Good hone technique. Rocket can't find it. Conditionally aerial, has mental resources and loves killing minions. So he's, I think, maybe the best. Angel, who's aerial always, can't find this, but can play your aerial events cheaper and possibly twice. It's a very interesting little niche of cards you can find where you can mix and match these traits to see who works best. I think ultimately it is Rocket Raccoon because he has all the traits. He has everything. He has aerial, and he makes mental resources, and he loves killing minions, and he can this and this and this. But I think it's a fun game to play.
And I think every time we create cards or they create cards that have these certain resource requirements, it just makes anybody who can create a wild resource that much better, right? Nova, aerial, and he's got the wild resource. I mean, anybody, like you said, if you're aerial, you want to get dive bomb with this, but if you just have have access to either in your hero kit or one of the other support cards, if you have access to a wild resource, it's just really good for you, right?
Domino.
So, for example, Captain America has fist resources that he generates. Now, he has access to Quinn Carrier, but so right off the bat, he's not creating the right resource. Same with Thor. You have to find another way to do it. So, how do we feel about final scores? Keiko, I'm going to let you go first. Final score.
I'd have to really try it out before I get a real feel for it, but it sounds like it'd be really fun to use in my decks. Like I'm going to have to find a way to squeeze them all in, because my Spider-Woman deck, for example, she has a card that readies her and gives her aerial. I remember trying Dive Bomb once before, and I could never find a use for it. Maybe I'll try it again and with Hone Technique in it, or just have Hone Technique in general. I don't know. I'll give it a 7 maybe, just based on me not knowing the card, not using the card, but based on this conversation and the use I can see from it. The only thing is maybe, as you mentioned before, the limitations for it. Having to land an aggression attack event and having a mental maybe kind of limits that for the better, I guess, but we'll see just how much use I can actually make of it.
For me, I'm going to say this card is an 8 out of 10. Overall, the theme works. I like the mental resources because it evokes the honed technique, the skill. The art, passable, but nothing spectacular. I'm not really an aggression player. We've talked before. Aggression is either my least favorite or my second least favorite. So I don't play this a lot. And it does require a bit of setup. You have to find hone technique, first of all, right? And then you have to have events that use hone technique. You have to have the right resources. So there is a bit of setup to find it. when it gets going, it's really powerful. I've seen it played a lot of times. So, yeah, it's really good. It's really strong. I just personally don't super enjoy it and don't use it a lot. It's rare that I put this in a deck. LazyTitan?
I'm going to give this card an 11.
Wow.
This card is phenomenal, and it's almost always the most fun I have playing Marvel Champions is when this card is on the table.
Yeah, it is.
Most of my favorite decks that I play are this, Rocket, Angel, even Nova, Miss Marvel. You can make work with it. It makes every part of the game more fun for me, even down to like the mulligan, because I think decks are most fun when you are looking for something in the mulligan, so that you can just immediately look at your hand, say, I didn't get what I'm looking for, pitch all of it, get it. So you just open your hand, no hone technique, get rid of it all, find the hone technique. And then you finally get to play it down, and working out what cards to play is so fun. Building the deck to make sure you have enough mental resources, but also enough attack events is really fun. One of my favorite cards for that is Plan of Attack, because it's both a mental resource and finds you attack events. Mm-hmm. So playing cards like that is really fun. Deciding which hero you're going to use for it is really interesting. Once you have it finally play it down, you get to feel like the biggest, baddest guy at the table, because you are smacking people for ungodly damage if you build it right. And you are maybe drawing cards off No Quarter. Maybe you're drawing cards off Rocket. Maybe you're playing Angel and you can play Die Bomb twice in a turn and waste villains. It's just adds so many layers to every part of at least my gameplay, from the mulligan to deck building to gameplay to deciding like hand management, like deciding which cards to play. It's a whole new ballpark. And I think this was the card I think that got me into aggression, and it's the card that keeps me there as my favorite aspect. It really is, I think, a perfect card in not only just fun wise, but game design. I think it's really well designed. It's really excellently implemented, and I think it's perfect for the aspect that needed it the most. So I'm going to give this card an 11.
Well, that is a full-throated endorsement from LazyTitan. I knew you'd rank this one pretty high.
Yeah.
Well, that is our discussion on hone technique. I hope that you enjoyed it. And if you did and you stuck around this long, please take the time to leave a rating and a review. That does mean a lot for the podcast. And feel free to subscribe or follow on whatever pod platform you use, or on YouTube. All of our details are down below if you want to find us on Instagram, email, whatever. Thanks for listening, everybody. And from Boom Guy and LazyTitan and Keiko, I will sign off and say goodbye, everyone.
See you later.
11 out of 10.